We have a lot of things to talk about. Aaron Rodgers is back, so we can talk about that. What is a reasonable expectation for Aaron Rodgers, who is one of the game's finest quarterbacks? And we thought he was done. We thought the Packers were done for the year. And as it turns out, Brett Hundley hung in there long enough to give them a chance. The Titans are 8-5. They really aren't in a position where they should be struggling as much as they are, but they are struggling. The Falcons also have a chance to make the playoffs. So a lot of area NFL teams having a chance to make the playoffs. What are some reasonable expectations for them in their upcoming games? And a question about the college football playoff. So that's where we'll start, actually, because Alabama is certainly worthy of being in the college football playoff. And I've had this conversation with a lot of people, but I think that ultimately Alabama is worthy of being in the college football playoff. But the reason why things got so dicey for Alabama, as they typically do not, is that Alabama has been suffering injuries, which is something that doesn't bother them as much as it bothers most other teams because of their amazing depth. And Alabama is one of the deeper teams in college football. But then there's the other issue, too, which is that Alabama's running game has been bad by Alabama's standards, right? Like, Alabama runs the ball better than most teams in the nation. But for their own standards, I think Alabama's running game has been really, really bad. And when you look at it, you go, well, they've got talent running the ball. Bo Scarborough, Damian Harris. What's the issue? Well, the issue with Alabama is the offensive line. Can the offensive line provide enough push? And can the offensive line provide enough to give the Crimson Tide an opportunity to be successful? Can they give them enough juice to give them an opportunity against Clemson? Because Clemson is top 5 defensive team in the nation. I mean, you'd have to say that Clemson is lights out defensively. And if you can't run the ball against Clemson, and they do a very good job of taking that away from you, as we saw earlier in the season, Clemson versus Auburn. Clemson took the running game away from Auburn, snatched it away. And if you're Auburn, you understand that when you get turned into a passing team, you become one-dimensional. Auburn didn't really show a lot of success in any game in which they got their running game taken away. And I would say that Jarrett Stidham is a more well-rounded quarterback than is Jalen Hurts. He is. And the fact of the matter still remains that, yeah, you force Jalen Hurts to be a passer first. You force Jalen Hurts to beat you with his arm, and you greatly reduce what Alabama is. You take away their biggest strength. And what happens when you take away their biggest strength? And we don't know the answer to that question necessarily. Now, we saw what happened when Auburn was able to limit them. And we've seen Alabama struggle at times. We saw them struggle against Mississippi State. That was the game that was surprising, the struggling there. We saw Alabama struggle a little bit against what was their other game of the season there? Alabama struggled against Mississippi State. They struggled against Auburn, and they had another struggle earlier in the year in which you saw what happens when you can limit Alabama's running, or when Bo Scarborough's not there, where the offensive line doesn't get enough push upfield. Alabama can be made to be vulnerable, and that has to scare you if you're a Crimson Tide fan. I don't know that you've ever come into the college football playoffs since we've been doing this dance. I don't know that you've ever come into this situation, A, as a sort of underdog, and B, in a situation where your team is this vulnerable. Because if you don't get that running game going and you're Alabama, you are forced to rely on Jalen Hurts. And that's a mixed bag. There is no telling what it is that you are going to get from that, right? Like, Jalen Hurts has proven that he has improved as a passer. I still don't think he's great as a passer, though. I still don't think that his excellence comes as a passer. Jalen Hurts still is overwhelmingly a runner who passes well than a passer who runs well. It's still overwhelmingly that. And as long as his profile is going to be that, we can't be certain exactly how good Alabama can be. And if you can reliably even say that Alabama beats Clemson, I think that they do. Because I've seen this story way too many times over and over and over again. You can't give Nick Saban nearly a month to prepare and expect him to lose. Nick Saban's one of the most prepared coaches in college football. If you give that guy a month, he beats you. And it doesn't matter what his team is and what your team is. If you give that guy a month, he beats you. Period. And this is too much time to give Nick Saban. Right? It's too much preparation time. And so I still want to side with Alabama in my gut. But at the same time, I'm just pointing out the fact Alabama is going to be made to be a one-dimensional team against the Clemson squad that excels at taking away your running game. All right? Like, there's nothing that would fill me with more joy than an all-SEC national title game. Mostly because watching the national media squirm would be incredibly delightful to me after all of this time in which they were proclaiming that the SEC was dead and you can't rely on football in the South anymore. And oh, look, here we are, and it's back. Like that makes me happy in large part because I'm a bitter person, and I like it when other people have to squirm doing their jobs. But I just think that that's not a sure thing, right? Like, we're not guaranteed that at all. When you look at what Dabo Swinney has built at Clemson, and I think that Dabo Swinney does a very good job of relying on his coordinators and his offensive coaches and his defensive coaches and really letting them come up with game plans that work, and then he trusts them enough to implement it. I mean, that's been a big part of Dabo's success. That, and he's a brilliant recruiter. This Alabama-Clemson game, this one, that's got to be, in my opinion, the best game of the bunch. Because I think these two teams are more evenly matched than they get credit for, right? I don't know if Clemson gets nearly enough credit for how well they play defensively. And I don't know how much Alabama gets credit for how much they play well offensively. Clutch with Keon Rose on Nooga Radio and NoogaRadio.com here on 92.7 FM. I don't know how much credit they get. But it all depends on the offensive line. It all depends on the offensive line, and they've been inconsistent this year by their own standards. Absolutely. So we're going to shift gears here over to the NFL because I want to talk about the Tennessee Titans because the Titans have me very frustrated. When I watch them on Sundays, I don't understand what the deal is with that football team. They have a good record, but having a good record doesn't mean in the NFL all the time that you are a good football team, right? Like, there's a saying that you are what your record says you are, and I don't necessarily believe that. I believe that there are some teams that get a little bit unlucky and they lose games that maybe they ought to win. And there are some teams that get lucky and they win games that maybe they ought to lose. And I think that the Titans fall into the category of the latter for sure. They are 8-5. But when you look at what the Titans do and what the Titans have done as a football team, they have been largely underwhelming. And it's been underwhelming from all angles, right? It's been underwhelming from the angle of the development of this offense, that when you looked at what they were able to do in the draft and in free agency, they were able to get Eric Decker. They were able to get Corey Davis. And that was supposed to boost their passing game. And it never came to fruition. It didn't happen. Not only that, but when you look at the running game for the Titans has absolutely regressed. The yards per attempt from both Derrick Henry and DeMarco Murray have gone backwards, right? The amount of yards that both of these guys pick up before they are contacted by the first defensive player has gone backwards. Marcus Mariota, who was, when he first came into the league, one of the more accurate quarterbacks in the league and one of the more deadly red zone quarterbacks in the league, he's regressed. He's thrown more interceptions to touchdowns this year. In fact, no quarterback in the NFL is worse is worse with a clean pocket to throw from, right? When he's got good timing and a clean pocket, Marcus Mariota has been the worst quarterback in the league on what should be the easiest throws that he has. He hasn't developed any kind of a rhythm, any kind of a passing relationship with any wide receiver or tight end not named Delaney Walker, right? Delaney Walker is not only the security blanket, he's the passing offense. He's the all of it. And this is a problem because Tennessee was supposed to get a boost from these guys, right? And I'm about to get back on my soapbox, my Mike Mularkey soapbox. We're about to get right back there again. But before I get right back there again, I want to point out that the Titans' defense hasn't been exactly a walk in the park either. Though one can't help but wonder if their defense is suffering because the offense can't stay on the field. The Titans have been outscored by all of their opponents combined by 21 points, which means that the games that they are winning are these low-scoring games against bad football teams that they have gotten, I think, lucky, at least in some part because of scheduling. They haven't played difficult opponents, and they've struggled against all of them. They struggle against Indianapolis, and they struggle against Houston without Deshaun Watson, and they struggle against teams that, to me, it seems that they should be routine, that they are beating them, and it's not necessarily the case. And I'm not necessarily certain how it is that you go about fixing it at this point in the season. But I'm saying this because we have seen what happens when you get a good quarterback, a good offensive coach, a coach who understands offenses, understands how to get the best out of his quarterbacks, the best out of his players, and can mold and develop young talent. Mike Mularkey's not that guy, and we knew he wasn't that guy from the jump. We knew Mike Mularkey didn't have that kind of capability, didn't have that kind of ability from the word go. This guy is talking about running some kind of ancient Cro-Magnon caveman offense, and it's not working, and it's damaging his young quarterback. Okay, Mariota's regressing, right? Which is why, even though the Titans played very well last year and seemed to make a lot of big strides last year, even though all of those things were happening, I could not trust Mike Mularkey. I still didn't want to give him credit for the turnaround of this team. I think that the turnaround of this team and the success of this team, in large part, the credit for that goes to GM John Robinson, who I think has put together one hell of a squad. I don't want to give Mike Mularkey credit for any of this because everything that he's doing appears to be detrimental and counterintuitive to being successful at the game of football. And I mean everything. What on earth is exotic smash mouth? Stop making up stuff. What is that? Like he just made up a thing so he could say, hey, here's how I go about running the offense I want to run, and I'll just sprinkle a little read option in there to make the people happy. And so you've got Marcus Mariota moving backwards. Dude is regressing right before our eyes. Marcus Mariota's talent is shrinking backwards. And so after a couple of years of steady improvement, now we're watching a year where he's moving back. And I'm going to tell you this right now. And I don't do this often because it's not something I take lightly. But if the Titans don't make the playoffs, they ought to fire Mike Mularkey. He's a bad coach. There's a trend in the NFL. Quarterbacks are not playing under center as much as they used to. You play from the shotgun a whole lot more often. This is more and more a passing league. And playing from the gun helps with that. The Titans play under center almost more than anybody in the league. With a quarterback, when you drafted him, didn't play under center very much at all. How much sense do you think that makes? It doesn't make any sense. Not at all. Like, when I watch the Titans play on Sunday, like, I have to seriously question what on earth they're doing. Right? Like, you can't develop chemistry with your wide receivers if you don't throw the ball. Like, it's just obvious. Like, that's how the chemistry gets developed. So, of course, when the Titans do throw the ball, and that's just a big, giant when, of course it's Delanie Walker that gets the ball. He's the only person who's ever been catching anything on this team for like the last 4 years. Like, I look at the play design and I go, this is not a football team playing in a modern NFL setting. Okay? I think that Mike Mularkey might be a man trapped in time. I bet when Mike Mularkey goes home, his cell phone doesn't have a screen. I bet when Mike Mularkey goes home, he's got the big, giant cinder block cell phone. You know, the one in the 80s, you got to pull the antenna all the way out. I bet when Mike Mularkey goes home to use his computer, it takes up his living room. I bet Mike Mularkey's car is Fred Flintstone's car. You got to start it with your feet. Like, he's not playing football in this time period with the rest of us at all. Where does Mike Mularkey come from? I think Mike Mularkey might have been sent to us from the past. Right? Like, his kids talk to him about downloading music. Mike Mularkey's never heard of a download before. Oh. I bet Mike Mularkey builds a fire to cook his food. Because I don't understand how it's possible to be employed as a professional football coach in the National Football League in the year of our Lord 2017 and still somehow want to run the ball. You have a quarterback that overwhelmingly completes well over 60% of his passes, which is enviable. I promise. But you want to run the ball. And look, it's good. It's fine that you want to run the ball. You've got DeMarco Murray. You've got Derrick Henry. But your quarterback is incredibly accurate. He's got a tremendous amount of touch on his deep balls. He's also mobile in a league, in a world where that kind of thing is a useful commodity. And Mike Mularkey, because he wants to coach football like a caveman, has taken away all of it. Every single part of it. You used your first round pick on a wide receiver. Mike Mularkey won't throw the ball. We have to fire this guy. I mean, and hire somebody from our decade, please. Please. I mean, when you look at a lot of the other coaching hires, a lot of it is you're trying to hire a guy that understands the way that the league works, right? Like, whenever an offensive coach gets hired somewhere or a defensive coach gets hired somewhere, you're trying to hire a guy that understands the way that the league works, but not just the way that the league works, the way that the league works now, right? Like, it's one thing to have great historical context, but you've got to coach the way that the league works now. And when you look at a lot of the recent successful coaching hires over the last 5 years, Mike Zimmer and the Vikings, and you see what's happening with Sean McVay and the Rams, when you look at a lot of the consistent coaching hires of the last 5 years that have produced any kind of success, a lot of these guys are very much plugged into the way that the league works now. And it doesn't matter if they're an offensive guy or a defensive guy, right? Like, Mike Zimmer's a defensive guy, but you don't hear Mike Zimmer saying, what we're going to do is run the ball 1,000,000 times a game. No, his quarterback is Case Keenum, and he still has his team throwing the football. Right? And to our surprise, Case Keenum's actually good. Who knew? Right? Who was aware of that development? right? Like the only head coach, so far as I can tell in the NFL, that I will give any kind of a pass to for running the ball a billion times a game is Doug Marrone with the Jacksonville Jaguars. And that's because his quarterback is Blake Bortles, and I don't know what else he's supposed to do. I really don't know. Like, no, you could get a lot of success out of just going with Leonard Fournette 100 times a game. So do that. But the rest of you, we play in a predominantly passing league. That's what this game is now, for better or for worse. Some people like it. Some people hate it. That's fine. But we play in a predominantly passing league. So you have to pass the football. Somebody tell me how it is that Mike Mularkey has decided that he alone will not pass the football. How is it that Mike Mularkey has decided that he alone is intelligent enough? What is he, hovering, like levitating above the rest of us, just ascending? What is he doing? How is it that Mike Mularkey is the only one that has unlocked the secrets of the kingdom, that by running the football, counterintuitive to what all the other NFL experts believe, that's the key to success? Right? Like, I understand that there's a certain level of logic. There's a certain level of thought that goes into trying to zig where others zag. But you can outthink yourself. You can think yourself into a position of absolute uselessness, which is exactly what has happened here. Your quarterback is a spread quarterback. Why do you have him under center? Why do you have him under center? I don't know. And that's before we get to the other issue that the Titans have, which is Marcus Mariota himself, right? Like that he himself has regressed. Though, again, I don't blame young quarterbacks for regressing. That typically is the nature of what happens when your coach is not a good coach, right? And we saw this with Jared Goff and the Rams last year, that Jeff Fisher was about to turn Jared Goff all the way bad. He was about to ruin that poor guy's career from the beginning. Jared Goff almost never had a chance. And now Sean McVay is his head coach, and it's night and day. And I'm saying the Titans need to get someone to Mariota before that even happens. But also, can Marcus Mariota's body withstand an entire 16-game season of hits? Because I'm starting to wonder. He gets taken out once or twice a season every year that he's been in the league. And that's not necessarily his fault. I won't say that. That's not necessarily his fault. But he's playing behind one of the best offensive lines in football.
Traffic, news, and information. Nooga Radio. Digital FM 95.3 HD4 and 92.7 FM.
3, 2, 1.
Chattanooga Radio. Digital FM 95.3 HD4. 92.7 FM's news now.
Morning rush hour traffic was slowed to a crawl when a truck crashed into the back of a school bus, crumpling the cab of the truck and delaying traffic for over 20 minutes at East Brainerd Road at Mackey Branch. No children were injured, but there were reports of an injury in the truck, EMS rushing the victim away. At the Tuesday City Council meeting, they voted unanimously to stick with Blue Cross Blue Shield after concerns were raised about United Healthcare, the company that the city was going to switch to for coverage, discovering that it would not cover CHI Memorial for retirees. Councilman Ken Smith saying that in the future, retirees need to have a say when they pick an insurer. A woman called police saying that a man tried to rape her in Martin Luther King neighborhood Tuesday night at about 7 p.m. Police say the male attacker escaped on foot, but his face caught on surveillance camera video. We've got it on our Facebook page. Russell Stroud, Nooga Radio News Talk 92.7 now.
Expect fair skies to continue through your nighttime. Overnight lows 30 to 33. Now for your Thursday, mostly sunny, high temperatures, upper 40s to near 50. Tomorrow night, a little colder, lows back into the upper 20s. Dry and chilly Friday, high staying into the 40s. Experience the magic of the holidays with Rock City's Enchanted Garden of Lights. Create your one-of-a-kind adventure with dazzling views and almost 1 million colorful lights. Visit CRockCity.com for all of the magical details. And I'm Source 12 Chief Meteorologist Patrick Ward.
Broadcasting live to over 1 million souls in Chattanooga, the Tennessee Valley, and beyond on frequency modulation 92.7. Sean Hannity, 25,000 watts on digital FM 95.3 HD4. CBS Radio News. NASCAR, Bloomberg Markets, David Tulis, streaming strong at NoogaRadio.com. Live on YouTube and Facebook. Nooga Radio, News Talk 92.7. Chattanooga Radio.
You're listening to 92.7 FM, Nooga Radio, NoogaRadio.com. It's Clutch with Keon Rose. I'm Keon Rose, if that is not abundantly clear. We have some NFL storylines to cover, in large part because Aaron Rodgers is back. He's been officially cleared to play. And that changes things, right? Especially if you're the Falcons. Because the NFC is a horrifying place. Right? The old Dave Chappelle joke. I wouldn't go there even if I knew the way. It's ridiculous what's happening over there because you've got the Falcons who are at 8-5 have an opportunity to make the playoffs. The Packers with Aaron Rodgers returning have an opportunity to run the table and make the playoffs. The Lions aren't done at all. The Panthers are still very much in this. We have a lot of very, very competitive teams. The NFC in the NFL, I think, is comparable to the Western Conference in the NBA, where just all of the talent overwhelmingly seems to be over there. You've got some high teams in the AFC, right? The Patriots are really good every year. When are they not? Seems that the Chargers are coming on as of late. The Steelers consistently win. But that's about it. I mean, that's the short list here. That's the short list. So, I mean, that seems to be all that there is. When you look at the NFC, you go conference by conference, and it is terrifying, right? The Eagles are still a scary team without Carson Wentz. They're not the same without Carson Wentz, but we had that conversation yesterday. But they're still a scary team without Carson Wentz. It's hard to discount what's happening with Drew Brees and the Saints now that the Saints have a running game. It's hard to overlook what's going on in the NFC North with the takeover going on there with the Vikings running the North right now, and that Aaron Rodgers is back, and that makes things pretty terrifying. In the NFC South, not only do you have the Saints, you've got the Panthers being competitive. You've got the Falcons being competitive. In the NFC West, the Seahawks, the Rams. Look, there's no fun happening in the NFC. None. And if you're the Falcons, look out, because you because of the way they started the season, you could be drawing the short straw on this. You really could.
Right now, they have the 6th seed currently, and on the one hand, because the Panthers play the Packers next week, they could see themselves going up if they're able to win then. But on the other hand, just one loss, and Seattle has the same record as them, and they could see themselves just on the outside for the rest of the year.
Look, it's possible. Okay, and by the way, because where are my manners? My youngest brother is home from college. He's a big NFL guy. So I said, you know what, chime in if you got anything to say. Chime in. And he's a little shy at first. He warmed up and he's slowly scooting over to the microphone, and now he's here. So we're just going through the NFL playoff picture here, especially in the NFC. As you said, the 6th seed is where the Falcons are, and yeah, that's not a secure spot to be in. It's actually arguably the worst spot to be in the entire conference. right? Like, you'd have to say so.
Yeah. Like, I'd say their only friend here is the parody that has been going on for a couple weeks now in the NFC, for that to continue and for them to rise out of that.
Yeah, you just have to hope basically that everybody loses in a bout of absolute and complete chaos, which is, in fairness, is absolutely possible. Now, where I'm a little, for me, I get to take a step back and just enjoy all the carnage because I root for the Redskins. And while people have been mentioning, well, the Redskins could still mathematically blah, 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 blah. No, they can't make it. And I've just divorced myself from that notion a long, long time ago. So I get to stand back and be a little bit more neutral in all of this. I still really like the Falcons to make the playoffs, but they're going to have to be able to consistently win a lot of these games that, in fair, like for instance, the first time they played Tampa Bay, that game was closer than it should have been, let's say. And that's one where I thought they could have run away with that game, gave themselves some rest, and it wound up being one that went down ultimately till the fourth quarter before they finally got some distance between late third quarter, early fourth quarter, before they finally got some distance between themselves and Tampa Bay. And they get Tampa Bay coming up this week, which for them, I think is a good thing to have an opponent that you're familiar with, but also an opponent that's not very good. That's something that's going to be ultimately helpful in this run. But what is a realistic expectation for Aaron Rodgers? Aaron Rodgers says that he's coming back and he's going to be playing in the playoffs or playing in this game like it's the playoffs, right? Which I think is the right mentality to have because the Packers are not in a position where they're guaranteed anything.
I mean, at this point, like, they're in the playoffs already because every loss for them, 9-7, will not make the NFC this year.
No. Not even close. And we've got 2 more games left on the docket. So you've got to win out if you're Green Bay. Looking at Green Bay's record here, your Green Bay's record is 7-6. So they're gonna have to beat Carolina, and the upcoming on this Sunday, and that's not an easy task at all. The way that Carolina's been playing football, and you're looking at a wait. What were you gonna say?
I was going to say the Panthers were able to overcome the Vikings this last week, and the Vikings are one of, I'd say, the more respected defensive teams in the NFC. So,
yeah, I mean, because the Vikings have that defense that's a top 5 defense. It's hard to pass on. It's tough to run on, but I think they found a way. I think there's a lot of threats there in that Panthers offense. This is actually a really surprisingly good Panthers team, and they're good. I don't want to say they're flying under the radar because I feel like that's a cliche that we use and we just kind of throw it about. But I will say that they are being overlooked a little bit because the way that the Saints are playing, they've sort of overshadowed everybody else in the NFC South. I don't know what's reasonable to expect from Aaron Rodgers. I do think that this defense that the Panthers have is vulnerable. It's a good defense, but it's not a great defense, and it's certainly not as dominant a defense as it was when they went to the Super Bowl. That defense forced turnovers at an alarming rate. Now, they did lose a lot of talent to free agency, that they lost Josh Norman. I forget the name of their safety. I think, was it Captain Munnerlyn? Is Captain Munnerlyn still on the team? I forget.
I'm not sure.
I think that they lost Captain Munnerlyn as well. Don't quote me on that, but I think that they did. So when you look at this team, it's not as dominant a defensive unit as it was 2 years ago. So it's vulnerable. It can be scored on, but it's still a tough team to score on. Can you expect Aaron Rodgers, after missing 8 weeks of football, can you expect that guy to basically bounce off the couch and go out there and deliver the kind of performance that he's always delivered in situations like this, in games like this? I don't know that that's necessarily a fair thing to say to expect a guy to do, even if you are looking at a guy like Aaron Rodgers, who might just be the best active quarterback in the NFL and is, in my opinion, and the trolls come after me on Twitter when I say this, but I think Aaron Rodgers is the most talented quarterback that's ever played the game. And even for him, I don't think that it's fair to expect him to just bounce back instantly. The man hasn't thrown a football really in 8 weeks.
I mean, he's reached this point where his legend has grown to the point where no reasonable expectation should allow this, and yet it's kind of hard to distance it because he's been so amazing all of the time with a team that has been exposed to have been just trash hanging on to him.
Right. And they've been pretty bad without him. And you can see, like, you can never underestimate a guy when he's gone, and you see how bad the team is when he's gone. Now, I will say this, though, because I think you brought up a very good point about his legend, how big his legend has grown. There are some players in the NFL that have achieved, I would say, Paul Bunyan status, where we just expect unreasonable things from them no matter what the circumstance. I think Aaron Rodgers is one of those guys. I think we're always surprised when anything goes wrong for Tom Brady. Even though people are allowed to have down games, we still act surprised when Tom Brady has a down game. I think J.J. Watt is also another guy that we've just allowed to have Paul Bunyan status. But J.J. Watt comes back and we're like, oh, look, he had a disappointing game. Well, the guy came back from double back surgery. He's allowed a disappointing game or two. Right? Like, I think that's fair. We've just allowed ourselves license to give some people Paul Bunyan status. Who's another Paul Bunyan status? Marshawn Lynch is another guy. Marshawn Lynch is a guy that when he fails to necessarily live up to his reputation of being this hard runner, because, I mean, again, from run to run, some of them are just going to be average runs. I think that people are a little surprised by that. You know, for instance, when the Seahawks lost that Super Bowl, Russell Wilson throwing that pass, that interception to Malcolm Butler on the 1 yard line, there was a stat out there that Marshawn Lynch was actually not that great from inside 3 yards on the goal line. Like, to me, you still give the ball to the hottest player on your team and to the surest bet that you've got going. I still think you do. I don't care. But the numbers are there to suggest that maybe Pete Carroll made the correct mathematical decision. I mean, ultimately he was wrong, so he didn't make the right decision.
Yeah.
But he made the right mathematical decision. He trusted the numbers. And I don't ever get on guys for trusting the numbers. I think that there's a certain level of just logistics you have to use to be successful just in everything, really. If you're going to start a business and 3 in every 4 of, like, say you're opening a restaurant and the restaurant's going to sell Colombian food or something, and 3 out of every 4 Colombian restaurants in your area fail. Yeah, you could still try it, but the mathematical decision is maybe choose a different food, or maybe open a different kind of business. I mean, that's ultimately, in my opinion, what makes the most sense. So I understand where they were coming from. I'm one of those guys. I just strongly believe we just granted Paul Bunyan status to Marshawn Lynch to the point where we were absolutely confident he was going in, and there's no guarantee that he would have made it.
Yeah, like, I will say, certainly nobody ever leaps to the defense of the guy who makes the wild card pick that evidence did not support, and then it fails.
Right. I mean, it's just because we do all this stuff where if people are successful and they're able to take a risk and capitalize on it, we act like they knew all along that their risk was going to pay off. And usually people don't know. You have some idea, but you don't really know. Like Mark Zuckerberg could have had some idea that Facebook might be successful. I don't think that even Mark Zuckerberg thought that Facebook would be what Facebook is now. I don't think he could have predicted that. How could he have known that originally? There was no space for that online. There was no space like it. I would say the same thing for Twitter. I would say the same thing for all of these startups, Uber. Like, I think you have some idea, like, okay, this can be successful, or the people that started Airbnb. But I don't think that you can know with absolute certainty exactly what it's going to turn out to be. And I think that when you make a similar decision and you fail, well, we apply the same logic and we just go, yeah, you should have known. Yeah, no. You took a risk. You should have known. Why didn't you know that? Right? So And Pete Carroll took a risk. They threw the ball instead of running the ball, which again was a better. Just look at the numbers. It was a better mathematical decision. Just wasn't the best football. I mean, it wasn't the best decision to make, because if it was the best decision to make, you'd won. I gotta keep prefacing it with that. Like, you would have won if you made the actual correct decision. But like, there's no shame in the choice that you made. Is where I'm going with that. But we've given Marshawn Lynch, back to digress to the point, we've given Marshawn Lynch such Paul Bunyan status that no one is allowed to think any differently than that.
I will say we've done that with like a lot of players, to the point where I remember earlier in the season, the Packers were playing the Cowboys, and the Cowboys score was like less than 2 minutes, and the Packers have to drive the whole field into the sun. And it's just like, no one, I don't think, ever really doubted Aaron, to the point where the Packers win on some of the most phenomenal plays I've ever seen. And everyone's just like, yeah, that's the guy.
Yeah. Well, okay. Yeah, that's true. Okay. So when you've achieved Paul Bunyan status, let's say, what ends up happening then is that we just sort of take amazing for granted with you. That not only are we surprised when you have the occasional down game, which you are allowed to have, not only do we not allow that to you, we also expect greatness to the point where it's routine. And we see this happen, by the way, all the time with LeBron, where LeBron does amazing things all the time. And literally, because he is LeBron, it's not surprising. Like, it's not thrilling. It's not exciting. LeBron James hasn't won the MVP award in God knows how many years at this point. And you could argue every year that LeBron James is the MVP. But we're not impressed by what he does anymore, because he does it so often, so consistently, so routinely, that we're just not, it's not a shock. It's not a surprise, right? Like, and one day LeBron's going to get old and we're going to realize, oh no, that was amazing. And then one day LeBron's not going to be in the league anymore, and there's not going to be anybody like him. And I don't know what we do then. Actually, it makes me feel impossibly old thinking about that already. But I don't know what we're going to do then.
I think it says something. It took like the absurdity of the Golden State Warriors, who are already amazing, and then added Kevin Durant for us to see that finals, see the Cavaliers lose, and then not immediately jump on LeBron for that.
Yeah, still blame him.
Yeah.
still blame him. Right? Like, it's not that the other team has an all-star team, a literal all-star team. Every member of that starting five made the all-star game, even Zaza Pachulia, who should never have made it. But every member of that starting five made it.
Just a flaw with.
Yeah, that's a complete flaw. I mean, that's ridiculous. But they're a literal all-star team. We blame LeBron.
Yep.
LeBron came up small and all of these things, all these things about what he should have done. Like, really, if you were in his shoes, you would have been able to do something better. You would have been able to do differently. I mean, you're crazy. You're absolutely crazy.
I mean, he played at a level to where if the finals MVP didn't have to be on the team that won, it would have been him.
Yes, and I still think should have been him. Quite frankly, I don't get this. The award is the most valuable player award. Who's the most valuable in the series? And just because your team is filled with one-way players and the other team is filled with two-way players doesn't necessarily mean that you're not valuable. It's as insane a thing as I have ever heard in my entire life. But yeah, I think when you look back at the NFC, just to digress back to the NFL, when you look back at the NFC, I want to say, and we were talking about this a little bit off air, but the Falcons are starting to hit their stride here and really settle into what Steve Sarkisian wants them to do offensively. Coming from Kyle Shanahan, it wasn't the same thing. They're not running exactly the same system. And Steve Sarkisian said he wasn't going to change everything, but you're going to change a lot of things. You have your own ideas as to what it is that you would do with an offense, right? You show up to a team, it's got Matt Ryan, it's got Devontae Freeman, Tevin Coleman, Julio Jones, and you've got a bunch of ideas as to what it is that you'd like to do when you have an opportunity to have all of these guys. And it looks like they're starting to settle in because correct me if I'm wrong, but I didn't see the production of Julio Jones as very high early in the season.
No, absolutely not. And like, I will say, I've heard from like football experts like Keon Fahey that like this offense, the reason it's been struggling at times is because it's just expected more from Matt Ryan than the previous offense with Kyle Shanahan. And like, you could definitely see that early on in the season when they would like squeak by the Bears, who were then revealed to just be a really bad football team.
Yeah, I mean, boy, did we actually ever expect the Bears to be good?
I mean, I certainly hope not.
Yeah, I think they still turned out to be worse. But yeah, to that point, this is an offense that does ask for a whole lot more deciphering. Kyle Shanahan is known for, if at least anything, simple offense. They're not complicated. And I think a lot of it, that's the beauty of it. And now there's a lot more weight on the shoulders of Matt Ryan. And when you look at the injury to Devontae Freeman, you look at Tevin Coleman now having to go through the concussion protocol. And what you're starting to see is a team that's relying a whole lot more on Matt, where if they're running the football, they might have more of a chance of taking that pressure off. Well, you're listening to Clutch with Keon Rose, Nooga Radio, NoogaRadio.com here on 92.7 FM. Remember, it's not how you start, it's how you finish. Stay clutch.
The Tennessee Valley's news talk leader, Nooga Radio.